The wheels of my car crunched against the familiar gravel of the old driveway, the same one I used to race my bike down when I was 10. Spring in Oregon smelled like blooming lilacs and fresh cut grass, and for a second, I let myself believe today might be different. I slowed as I passed the neighborhood sign, still faded at the corners, and glanced at the house I hadn't seen in years. I told myself I came for the anniversary, for Grandma, maybe even for closure, but truthfully, I came hoping things had changed, hoping that time had mellowed the sharp edges of family resentments, that maybe, just maybe, the people who shared my blood had found it in them to be decent. I parked, smoothed my jacket, and grabbed the small box of artisanal chocolates I'd brought, because showing up empty-handed was not how I was raised, no matter how they treated me. My phone buzzed with another text from Odell. "Please be on time, we're starting at 2 sharp. Don't wear anything too loud." Not a request, an instruction. I sighed. Classic Odell. As I walked toward the backyard, I spotted Grandma near the porch swing, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. She didn't wave, just gave a nod, soft, knowing, the only person here who ever looked at me like I mattered. Balloons bobbed lazily in the breeze. Cousins I hadn't seen in years smiled too brightly. Aunt Lois clutched her wine glass like a lifeline, already rosy-cheeked and gossipy. There were floral centerpieces and monogrammed napkins, but underneath it all the air felt tight, like everyone was pretending not to notice the guest, who didn't quite fit anymore. Odell stood near the grill, laughing too loudly as he recounted some deal he'd just closed. 3 properties in 1 week, he boasted. If only some people in the family would stop wasting their degrees and get into real estate. People chuckled politely. My smile was tight. I sipped my lemonade and bit my tongue. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. Then came the comments, one after another. "So you still renting in the city? No kids yet? Isn't it about time? Your house must be worth a fortune. Do you even need all that space?" I gave rehearsed answers, calm and clipped. Every question felt like a poke, every smile a blade. I glanced at Grandma. Her eyes met mine briefly. She didn't speak, but the slight shake of her head told me she saw it, all of it. They say blood is thicker than water, I thought bitterly, but sometimes it just stains deeper. I was halfway through a conversation with a second cousin I barely knew when Odell clinked his glass with a spoon. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" He and his wife stood together, all teeth and charm. "We just want to thank you all for being here. Family means everything," she chimed in, "and today we want to celebrate that unity." I froze when they turned toward me. "Maribel, come here a sec," Odell said, gesturing me forward. I hesitated, but the crowd was watching. Phones already raised. I stepped into the center of the patio, the sun suddenly too bright. Odell handed me a small velvet box. "A little something," he said, "for everything you've done for the family." I blinked. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the lid. Legal documents, transfer of property. They wanted me to sign over the house, my house, the one I'd paid for, maintained, lived in alone since I was 27. "For easier management," Odell added smoothly. "You're always so busy, we thought this would simplify things." I looked up. Their smiles were rehearsed, calculated, every eye was on me, and for a split second I almost laughed. "I'm not signing anything," I said, my voice even. The mood shifted. You could feel it. Odell's face twitched. "Don't make a scene," he said under his breath. Then in one swift motion he grabbed the glass of wine from the table and threw it. It hit square across my chest. Red soaked through my blouse, dripping down in slow motion. Gasps rippled. I didn't move, didn't cry, just looked down at the stain as the silence roared. This isn't about keeping peace anymore, I thought. This is about erasure. I caught Grandma's expression from across the yard. Her lips were tight, her eyes hard. Something shifted behind them, a tension I hadn't seen before. When someone shows you who they are, I remembered, believe them the first time. I turned, walked through the stunned crowd, the documents still clutched in my purse, my dress wet and clinging, my heels clicking sharp on the concrete. At the edge of the yard, I looked back. Grandma raised her hand just slightly, as if she were about to say something, or maybe signal something. I didn't know then that this night was just the opening act. Upstairs, I shut the bathroom door and locked it behind me. The moment the latch clicked, the silence hit harder than the wine had. I leaned against the sink, looking at my reflection. Blouse clinging to my chest, maroon stain like a badge of humiliation. I should have walked out for good, gotten in my car and never looked back. But something about the way they'd all looked at me. Not shocked, not sorry, calculated. It wasn't a slip, it was a message. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I peeled the blouse off, ran cold water over the fabric, watching the red swirl down the drain. The whole thing played back in my mind. Odell's smirk, his wife's forced grin, the velvet box. That wasn't an emotional outburst, that was a setup. Downstairs I could hear the laughter again, Odell's voice rising above the rest, smooth and controlled. People avoiding eye contact earlier, now pretending like nothing happened. In the hallway, Grandma stood quietly near the guest room, hands folded. We didn't speak. She just gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. I made a decision right then. I wouldn't run. Not this time. I'd stay the night. Let them think they'd humiliated me into silence. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Later that evening, the party had officially moved inside. Odell knocked on my door, polite, practiced. We'd love to have a quick family talk in the library, just to clear the air. I followed him down, towel over my shoulders, wine stains still faintly visible. The library smelled like old wood and newer lies. Fireplace flickering, dusty bookshelves and, coincidentally, papers already laid out on the center table. Cousin Elise, Uncle George, and his wife sat scattered around, sipping brandy like it was a board meeting. Nothing about it felt casual. Odell smiled that host smile again. We've been discussing estate matters, trying to streamline things, for Grandma's peace of mind, protecting family wealth, you understand. He pushed a folder toward me. It's just preliminary, a draft. You'd be doing us a huge favor by signing tonight. Nothing binding, just helps the process. I didn't even reach for it. What's it say? Oh, legal stuff, his wife chimed in, just confirming shared access. House title, so things don't get messy later. I looked around. No one met my eyes. Don't sign your rights away with a smile, I thought, keeping my voice even. I finally picked up the folder, thumbing through pages slowly. Legalese dressed as goodwill. Words like facilitate, expedite, and provisional custodianship. I knew those terms. They didn't mean sharing, they meant handing over. This wasn't for Grandma, this was about my house. I'd spent years reviewing contracts in corporate audits. You learn what to look for, small phrases that say a lot. I flipped back a page. There it was, irrevocable. Transfer of primary property rights. My hand went under the table, slid my phone from my pocket and hit record. I placed it face down on my thigh, screen off. Uncle George, unaware, said, "We've got a window to close this with the silent investor. He won't wait forever." I kept my face still. So that was it, a backdoor deal. Probably months in the making. I wasn't just an obstacle, I was a threat to their payday. When the wolf smiles, it's not because he's at peace. I straightened my back and looked Odell squarely in the eye. Thanks. I'll read this thoroughly overnight. Legal stuff's tricky. You wouldn't want me to miss anything. He nodded slowly. Of course, we trust you. Liar. Back in my room, I opened a separate text thread, sent a photo of the first page to a friend from college, a paralegal who owed me a favor. Her reply came quick. Do not sign. That's a full transfer. Walk away. I didn't walk away, not yet. Instead, I texted her back. Need a real estate attorney by morning, quiet, fast. I dug into my purse, pulled out my spare key and a note to myself. Change the locks. No matter what sweet words they dressed it up in, this was war. They weren't protecting the family, they were trying to erase me from it. Grandma's warning played in my head. That quiet nod wasn't just sympathy. She knew, she'd known all along. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the ceiling. I've spent a lifetime being underestimated. That ends now. A calm woman isn't weak. She's calculating. As I opened the door to step out, documents tucked in a plain envelope, Odell's voice followed from the hallway. Just don't take too long. Others are waiting. I didn't answer. I didn't look back. Waiting for what? To steal what's mine? By the time I came back from the kitchen, half a sandwich in one hand, glass of water in the other, the house was steeped in a silence that didn't feel peaceful. It was the kind that wrapped around your ankles like rope. I walked slowly past the living room, lights dimmed, only the clock ticking in the corner. The back porch door was closed now. Odell's car still sat in the driveway, engine quiet but headlights off, as if it had just landed there and decided to wait. In the upstairs hallway, I noticed Grandma's door cracked open just enough to show she was still awake. She didn't speak, just the faint sound of her rocking chair creaking. Across the hall, Lenora's silhouette drifted behind her curtain. I returned to the study. One small lamp lit the desk where I'd spread the documents earlier. They were still there, right where I'd left them, but somehow they looked different, more dangerous. I sat down slowly, pulled my father's old reading glasses from the drawer. I never needed them for my eyes, but they helped me remember what he always told me. Never sign what you didn't read twice. Fine print hides fine tricks. The calm before the storm often carries the heaviest weight. I laid 2 versions of the contract side by side. The one they handed me tonight and a digital version I'd quietly airdropped from Adele's tablet earlier, under the pretense of checking a family photo. On the surface they looked the same letterhead, same tone, but buried in the footnotes, phrases only someone trained to look would catch, was the difference. Irrevocable property transfer, exclusive custodial control, occupancy rights void upon reassignment. They weren't offering protection, they were writing me out. I leaned back. Dad had once made me highlight an entire contract with a red pen when I was 12. Find the trap, he said. If you can't spot it, you're the one being hunted. So I pulled out my phone, opened the legal database app I still had bookmarked from work, and started matching phrases. What I saw made my stomach twist. This wasn't sloppy wording. This was crafted, intentionally misleading. Quiet theft dressed in the language of love and unity. I tapped open the recording from earlier. I had left it running longer than I thought. Odell's voice came through, calm, smug. We'll just force her hand tomorrow. She'll fold. There it was, no discussion, no doubt. They weren't negotiating, they were cornering me. I backed everything up to the cloud, labeled the files. Fraud family documents. For once, I didn't care if someone saw the folder name. Then I heard the doorknob turn. Odell stepped in without knocking, eyes narrowing, when he saw me with the documents open and my phone in hand. What are you doing? I didn't flinch. Reading what you gave me. He walked in further, tone tightening. Those were confidential. No, they were predatory. That's different. He reached for my phone. I moved back instinctively. You need to stop playing detective, Maribel. A cough echoed down the hall. Grandma's. Not loud, just there, like she wanted me to know she was still listening. I'm not playing, I said. You think I'm naive because I don't live in this house, but I know exactly what you're trying to do. He smirked. You think you've figured it all out. I turned the volume up on the recording and let it play. His voice, his words, clear. We'll just force her hand tomorrow. The hallway door had drifted open. A few relatives had gathered, clearly drawn by the noise, murmurs, sharp intakes of breath. Lenora pushed through, whisper shouting, "Turn that off! This isn't fair!" Grandma stepped into the doorway, holding her cane like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "Let it play." Silence. I turned it off after a beat, then looked right at Odell. "You wanted me out of the picture, but I'm still here." He opened his mouth, closed it. I held the contract up. "This isn't valid anymore. Tomorrow I'll speak to a lawyer. You want my cooperation? You ask. You don't ambush." "You think this is your house?" he snapped. "I don't think," I said. "I know what's mine." A quiet buzz filled the room, the low sound of everyone realizing this wasn't just a family issue. This was about power, about respect, about blood not always meaning trust. "I've spent a life being ignored," I said, steady now. "Tonight I demand hearing." And I wasn't leaving empty-handed. "Tomorrow I decide what stays mine, no negotiation." Truth, once exposed, has no ally in darkness. Odell didn't move. His eyes darted, calculating. Then he sneered. "You think this stops me? Wait until the world hears my version." I didn't blink. My phone was still recording. He didn't know how loud silence can shout. Morning came slow, like it didn't want to deal with what last night left behind. I sat alone in the sunroom, hands wrapped around a warm mug of black tea. The light filtered through the glass in slanted lines, soft and golden. It was a quiet that pretended to be peaceful. Too perfect, too staged, the kind of silence you'd expect after someone hid all the broken glass. From my seat, I watched Odell stroll across the kitchen like he hadn't tried to screw me over 10 hours ago. Lenora hummed some old pop tune while pretending to water fake orchids. It was all too much. Too cheery, and it made my stomach tighten. Then I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on wood. Grandma. She leaned gently on her cane and gave me a look, not worried, not warm, just knowing. "Walk with me," she said, nodding toward the garden. It had been years since she asked for that. We stepped into the cool morning air, the scent of rosemary and damp earth rising to meet us. She moved slow, deliberate, eyes scanning the ground like she was reading it. I kept quiet, matching her pace, trying to read her instead. "You sure you want to keep holding on to this place?" she asked without looking at me. I shrugged, then caught myself. "I don't know what I want yet." She nodded, stopping beside the bird bath, now chipped and leaning slightly. Her fingers grazed the edge. "Still water runs deep, and sometimes it runs dangerous." I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. "I know your daddy taught you to look close at what people don't say," she added. "So look now." Then she touched my wrist, held it a second longer than necessary. "Look for the letter. It explains more than I can say out loud." She started walking again, like she hadn't just handed me a loaded message. Some truths aren't spoken, they're found. That afternoon, after everyone had dispersed and the house was once again pretending to be normal, I made my way back to the garden. The sun had shifted, throwing long shadows across the stone path. I knelt at the bird bath, fingertips brushing along the base. One stone was loose. I eased it out, slow and careful, like it might bite. There it was, a small plastic-wrapped envelope, yellowed at the edges. My name on the front, Dad's handwriting. I held it longer than I should have. Then I opened it. Inside was a short letter. Personal. Simple. Written like he'd known this moment would come. "If Adele ever corners you," it read, "chances are he's not alone. Outside money changes people. Don't trust what they say about streamlining. Check the deed again. There's a co-ownership clause tied to a trust. You control it, not them." My breath caught further down. "If you're reading this, then I didn't teach you everything in time, but I trust you'll learn the rest on your own." I read it twice, then again, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed the weight of it to settle in. He hadn't left me alone, he'd left me armed. Back inside, I moved differently. Quieter, yes, but not timid. I passed Lenora in the hallway. She gave me a soft, Hey there! Like we were still playing house. I didn't stop. Didn't answer. I went straight to my room, opened my laptop, and pulled up the trust documents I had ignored the night before. No more ignoring. This house isn't my prize, it's my proof that I'm not invisible. I scrolled through clause after clause, highlighting every section that gave me control, every detail they hoped I'd overlook. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for facts, for clarity. And maybe after all this, peace. Sometimes the strongest weapon is knowing what they don't think you know. I had just closed the trust file, leaned back with a long exhale when I heard it. Papers rustling in the hallway. I stood, walked to the door, and there she was, Lenora, standing there like she belonged in every room, one of the trust documents in her hand. Her smile wasn't surprise, it was satisfaction. After Lenora's little hallway stunt, I didn't wait long. The weight of that document in her hand told me things were already moving behind my back. Again. So I moved first. I asked Odell to meet me in the dining room. No raised voice, no accusations, just a simple, "We need to talk." He showed up 15 minutes later, with that easy grin he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. The room still smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. Afternoon sun poured across the table, lighting up the papers I'd already laid out. "I figured you'd come around," he said as he sat, like I was the one crawling back. I slid the trust documents across the table. "You remember this clause?" I tapped the paragraph about co-ownership and irrevocable authority. He barely glanced down. "Dad was always paranoid, you know that." "No," I said, keeping my voice even. "He was thorough, there's a difference." He laughed lightly, too lightly. "Come on, Maribel, you didn't really read all that fine print." I didn't blink. "You didn't think I would." Then I pulled out the letter, the original deed, highlighted terms, my father's signature in ink that hadn't faded one bit. "You were hoping I'd be too tired or too trusting, but you pushed too long. When you push someone long enough, don't be shocked when they push back." The grin faded. He leaned forward, voice dropping. "You think this gives you the whole picture?" "You mean there's more?" I asked, "only that you're not the only one who's kept things close to the chest." His tone turned sharper now, like a blade slowly unsheathing. "You sure you want to drag our name through legal hell?" I didn't flinch, just stared. He leaned back, smirking again. "You used to lean on me when your savings dried up. You forgot that." "That was survival," I said. "This is principle." He shook his head. "You don't want this fight." I stood calm, still. "I didn't want any of this, but I'm not backing down." He hesitated at the door before turning. "Don't say I didn't give you a chance." And then he was gone. I closed the door behind him, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. That was it. The line had been drawn. There was no pretending now. I turned back to the table and began sorting the papers, grouping, labeling, scanning. I backed up the files on 3 different drives. Then I called my lawyer, set an appointment, told her we'd need a full review. I thought about Dad, about the way he used to sit at this same table late at night, with a single desk lamp on and papers spread just like mine were now. I remembered the sound of his pen scratching when the rest of the house slept. "You don't fight because you want to," he told me once. "You fight because you're done being underestimated." I understood that now. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about the house. This was about being heard, seen, counted. Power doesn't always come from volume. It comes from knowing what you stand for. If they pushed me again, I'd take it all public. Names, dates, recordings, everything. That evening, the mansion slipped into a hush again. But it was the kind of quiet that screamed under its breath. At dinner, Grandma gave me a slow nod over her soup. It wasn't approval, it was alignment. Lenora didn't say a word, barely touched her plate. Her shoulders sat tighter than usual. After we ate, I slipped upstairs and scanned the letter again, emailing a copy to my lawyer with a short message. "Trust verification needed, confidential. I watched the send icon disappear and felt a calm settle into me. Not peace, not yet, but something stronger. Let them try, I won't fold again. I was shutting down my laptop when the alert popped up. New email, no name, just the subject line. You don't know what you're dealing with. I clicked it, and when I opened the attachment, everything I thought I knew shattered. The hallway outside the law office was dim, empty, hushed like a church after the sermon. I stepped in, closed the door behind me, and took a deep breath. My legs ached from standing too long during that drawn-out dinner, but I wasn't tired. I was wired. I slid the tablet across the desk, opened the trust and deed files, and started comparing again. Same document titles, same layout, but then the signatures, not just different pen pressure, different dates, subtle, almost elegant tampering. The kind of thing you wouldn't see unless you were looking. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Check the margins, Marybelle. That's where lies hide. I zoomed in, margins trimmed, initials erased, dates tweaked. These weren't just old versions, they were doctored, deliberately and not by accident. I felt a sting of betrayal, but I didn't flinch. I muttered, "You think I wouldn't notice?" Not this time, not after everything. I heard the doorknob turn again. I didn't look up, but I smelled her perfume before I saw her. Vivica. She came in slowly, clutching something to her chest, a journal, leather-bound. "We need a minute," she said, voice even. I kept my eyes on the screen. "Just say it." She laid the journal down and flipped it open. My own handwriting stared back. I remembered that entry. I wrote it when I was 9, after Dad left, for what turned out to be the last time. Notes about feeling watched, about how she made me feel like I owed her. "You were hurting," she said. "I saved this to remind you where you came from, what we protected you from." I turned my chair fully toward her. "You mean what you covered up?" Her jaw twitched. "I've carried this family alone for decades. Your father, he wasn't who you think he was." I leaned forward. "Then why bury the truth?" She hesitated. "Because truth ruins families. And you're playing with fire." She touched the edge of the journal, then my hand. "Don't dig too deep, Marybelle. Let sleeping ghosts lie." I pulled away. "Then you'd better leave, because I'm digging." She left, silent. I was still staring at the door when it flung open again. This time it wasn't quiet. Odell barged in, his face red, Lenora on his heels with that syrupy condescension I'd come to recognize. "Turn them over!" he barked. "Every file. You're not cleared to hold family legal documents." Lenora chimed in, soft and sinister. "This isn't just about you. You're threatening the estate." I stood. "You want to talk legalities? Let's. Clause 17. You both signed off on access privileges years ago." Odell scoffed. "Under duress." "Under oath," I corrected. Then I hit play on my phone. His voice played out loud. "We'll just force her hand tomorrow." From outside, a guest audibly gasped. The hallway wasn't as empty as they thought. Odell's face twisted. "You're manipulating recordings now." "No, I said. I'm exposing them." His voice was louder now. "You've crossed the line. Don't think we won't take you down with us." I folded my arms. "I'm counting on it." Once the door slammed shut behind them, I acted fast. I sent the evidence to Rachel, my lawyer, then BCC'd the same files to a journalist I trusted and to Grandma. I didn't care who saw anymore. If they wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd meet them in court. "You wanted me out," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "You should have picked a cleaner fight." The room quieted again. I could feel the house leaning in, listening. Then I felt her behind me. Grandma. She didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, but I felt her presence like a shield. I sat back in the chair, opened one last folder. I'd made my choice. I wasn't scared anymore. Then, faint, a drawer sliding open behind me, the sound of paper. I turned slowly, and there he was, holding the original deed, unsigned. Breakfast felt like a trial. The sun shone across the table, but the faces around me were shadows. Odell leaned forward, declaring his opinions on tax reform and court rulings, loud enough to drown silence but careful not to say anything about last night. He avoided looking at me. Lenora moved between chairs with the coffee pot, refilling every cup except mine. Grandma sat still, hands folded, her eyes sweeping the table as though measuring our loyalty. Vivica, in soft pastels and a gentle smile, slid into her mother role again, talking kindly, laughing lightly, but the edges of her words betrayed her. My toast tasted bland, cut into neat cubes. It felt like dining with wolves in silk, I thought, while my skin felt raw and alert. I sat upright, pretending to read the menu, heart tightening with each syllable of their conversation. I excused myself, said I needed to check something in the study. My legs felt brittle walking down the hallway. When I stepped inside, the room smelled of old paper and dust stirred. My files, once organized, lay in disarray. The contract pages I counted and labeled were incomplete. The clause I depended on was gone. My pulse echoed in my ears. I opened my laptop, logged into the security feed, and rewound to past hours. I saw Vivica slip in, hands brushing across papers, repositioning stacks, her scarf slipping over my chair. The memory of her words floated back. Some truths are best protected, even from you. That phrase had shifted meaning now. She wasn't shielding me, she was manipulating me. Betrayal spiraled in my chest. I left without knocking and crossed to Grandma's sitting room. She sat by the window, pale light falling across her face. I didn't wait. "What's going on?" I asked, voice steady though my insides trembled. She withdrew a small velvet pouch and handed me a sealed paper and a USB drive. "Your grandfather foresaw this," she murmured. "He included me as co-mediator in case someone tried to rewrite the rules." I unfolded the document with shaking fingers. It granted her authority to freeze asset transfers for 30 days. Shock and respect warred in me. "You could stop them?" I said. She nodded slowly. "I was waiting to see if you'd stand." A new clarity filled me. This wasn't just survival, this was strategy. A knock followed, soft, hesitating. Vivica's voice came through. "Can we talk?" I opened the door. She entered, eyes red, breath caught. She began with childhood memories, my first recital, her pride, the little rituals of mothering. For a moment, the weight of the present blurred with nostalgia. Then she changed tone. "Everything I did was to keep this family in one piece," she said, her voice gentle but firm. I stood. "Then maybe it's time it broke." She stared at me, confusion and hurt flitting across her face. Daughter and mother divided by more than our words now. She turned, walked out without another word. The click of the door felt final, like a verdict. I gathered my notes, stacking them carefully. Grandma appeared in the doorway, quiet and steady. She handed me a plain envelope. "Read this before tomorrow's hearing," she said, eyes grave. I held it, felt its weight in my hand, and knew that the next day would change everything. Morning light filtered through tall windows as I arrived at the courthouse. The hall was full. Neighbors, reporters, distant relatives who once said they didn't want to get involved. My lawyer stood before the panel, calm and precise, laying out the evidence, the recording of Adele's voice, the trust clause Grandma held, the notarized mediation power she claimed. I listened from my seat, heart steady. Odell's defense stumbled, hesitant, defensive, trying to rewrite the story. Lenora attempted to redirect attention toward procedural technicalities, but her voice shook. Then Grandma took the stand. She spoke quietly but firmly, reaffirming my claim, explaining how the trust had been manipulated, how she'd been granted oversight to prevent abuse. The gavel finally came down. The decision. Everything stays with me. The mansion, the property, the rights, they remain mine. I felt a release, but not a shout. Something deeper, quieter. I rose, smiled briefly to those who had stood by me, and walked out. No spotlight, no dramatics, just a steady step through the room. The shock on Odell's face was real. He looked like someone who expected fireworks, not silence. Guests muttered, "She didn't need to shout to win." Grandma walked beside me, cane tapping lightly, presence solid. We exited into morning air. Back at the house, I returned through the foyer and moved from room to room. I placed a hand on the banister, inhaled the scent of old wood and memories. In the living room, I paused, seeing chairs I once rearranged, pictures I once taped back. I walked to the garden doors and opened them. The yard stretched, trees swaying, the grass I had mowed in silence. I stood there a long time, thinking about home, not ownership but belonging. I felt both the weight and the promise of legacy. That evening I invited a few people, Grandma, Brielle, close friends, into the front parlour. Odell was invited, and though he came, he stayed in the corner, silent and remote. I told them my plan. Part of this house would become a refuge, a retreat for those betrayed by family, a place to heal. I spoke of boundaries, worth, reparation. I said, "This is mine, not just in title but in purpose." Their faces reflected relief, pride, cautious optimism. Grandma nodded, her eyes bright. After everyone left, Grandma returned, gesturing to the dining table. There lay folded napkins in the shape of leaves, the same small signature gesture from the day we first gathered here. I paused, I remembered. I touched one corner of a napkin, quiet, steady. The fight was over, but the story would go on. The house was mine, but so was the promise of what it could become. Morning light filtered through tall windows as I arrived at the courthouse. The hall was full. Neighbours, reporters, distant relatives who once said they didn't want to get involved. My lawyer stood before the panel, calm and precise, laying out the evidence. The recording of Odell's voice, the trust clause Grandma held, the notarized mediation power she claimed. I listened from my seat, heart steady. Odell's defense stumbled, hesitant, defensive, trying to rewrite the story. Lenora attempted to redirect attention toward procedural technicalities, but her voice shook. Then Grandma took the stand. She spoke quietly but firmly, reaffirming my claim, explaining how the trust had been manipulated, how she'd been granted oversight to prevent abuse. The gavel finally came down. The decision, everything stays with me. The mansion, the property, the rights, they remain mine. I felt a release, but not a shout, something deeper, quieter. I rose, smiled briefly to those who had stood by me, and walked out. No spotlight, no dramatics, just a steady step through the room. The shock on Odell's face was real. He looked like someone who expected fireworks, not silence. Guests muttered, "She didn't need to shout to win." Grandma walked beside me, cane tapping lightly, presence solid. We exited into morning air. Back at the house, I returned through the foyer and moved from room to room. I placed a hand on the banister, inhaled the scent of old wood and memories. In the living room, I paused, seeing chairs I once rearranged, pictures I once taped back. I walked to the garden doors and opened them. The yard stretched, trees swaying. The grass I had mowed in silence. I stood there a long time, thinking about home, not ownership, but belonging. I felt both the weight and the promise of legacy. That evening, I invited a few people, Grandma, Brielle, close friends, into the front parlour. Odell was invited, and though he came, he stayed in the corner, silent and remote. I told them my plan. Part of this house would become a refuge, a retreat for those betrayed by family, a place to heal. I spoke of boundaries, worth, reparation. I said, "This is mine, not just in title, but in purpose." Their faces reflected relief, pride, cautious optimism. Grandma nodded, her eyes bright. After everyone left, Grandma returned, gesturing to the dining table. There lay folded napkins in the shape of leaves, the same small signature gesture from the day we first gathered here. I paused, I remembered. I touched one corner of a napkin, quiet, steady. The fight was over, but the story would go on. The house was mine, but so was the promise of what it could become.